on behalf of Emerson College, I want to tell you that we so appreciate you making time for this important conversation. We here on campus have been buzzing for the last 2 days. The Teach In on Race is an annual event here at Emerson, and this one has not disappointed. Our keynote speaker was Anna Devere Smith, renowned actress and playwright. We also had a theatrical performance, powerful one last night by Charles Reese. And this is a very important conversation. And so we thank you for joining us. To give you a sense of why this particular session is so important, I'll just mention the theme of our event this year, and that is teaching truthfully about race and racism within the academy. And I'll take a note from our wonderful professor, Lizzie Cooper Davis, who just concluded hosting a session with our keynote speaker Anna Devere Smith, and our students. And the way Lizzie opened up the session is, she said, we can think of the theme in 3 chunks because it can be a lot. Teaching truthfully is a subject in and of its own. Race and racism is a subject of its own in the academy. But thinking about the intersection and the various nexus points within those 3 chunks can provide for a fruitful conversation. This particular session is going to provide a unique addition to the teach-in lineup, and I'd like to hand it over to our moderator, James Mason. But once again, welcome to Emerson's Teach-In on Race.
And I'm going to add one more welcome to that, and thanks so much. Tuesday, my name is James Mason. I am the Associate Provost and Dean of Faculty at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. And we are a part of the ProArts Consortium. And I'm going to, for those of you who are not aware, the Professional Arts Consortium, also known as ProArts, is an association of 7 Boston colleges dedicated to the visual and performing arts. We provide resources to expand our community's experience of the arts in the greater Boston area and beyond. In addition to offering faculty development programming, we provide opportunities for students at our member institutions, and we work to expand the experiences of students at Boston Arts Academy, the city's only public high school for the visual and performing arts, which was founded in 1998 out of a partnership between ProArts and the Boston Public Schools. ProArts strives to cultivate collaborative programs and transformative projects that have the capacity to strengthen the educational purposes of its member institutions and to take a leadership role in promoting the vital and central values of the arts in Boston and beyond. So that's us, folks, ProArts. But we're also here, as Tuesday said, to talk about teaching in the academy in terms of anti-racism and anti-Blackness. And it's really fitting that we're in the midst of Black History Month. And unless you've been under a rock, you can have an understanding as that there is an assault on Black history to either diminish it or make it disappear. So it's really crucial for us to actually uphold the good and the bad. And this talk today with these esteemed colleagues are going to help facilitate how that's done or not done in our academy. And with that said, let's introduce the panelists. First, we're going to start with Brent Smith, Interim Dean at Emerson College, Judith Anderson, Industrial Design Professor at Mass College of Art and Design, and Ron Savage, Berklee College of Music. And I'm going to start us off, if we can hear from each one of you in terms of where you sit now in your academy. How do you reflect on the subject at hand that we're going to discuss today, just from your own context to share with the audience here? And I'm going to say that I will direct. So let's start with Brent.
All right, thank you very much, James. From my view as a professor and presently as an interim dean, I view part of my responsibility as an educator and then maybe also a leader of educators to really think about how we have and have not interrogated our fields and the disciplines that comprise them. And so as we think very much today about the canons of our discipline, we think about the thought leaders, et cetera, how they show up in our course syllabi, in the learning experiences, very much important. So we're engaging on things like curriculum mapping projects to look at the geographic origins of the thought leaders that we feature in our courses. So that's just one example, and I'm sure we'll get to more as we have this discussion.
Thanks, Brent. Judith, can you go next?
Hi, yes. So I think one of the things that I just want to point out is that I have, I guess my lens is kind of bifocal. And even in this venue right now, I'm looking at gender and being a Black woman. So if I say that in my mind, I'm a woman first, and then I'm looking at my Black aspect of my race. So I'm bringing that all the time. Like I said, there's a bifocal lens because I'm bouncing back and forth between those two. And the thing that in my teaching, I mean, I was working as a department chair for 9 years prior. So in a little bit more of administrative role, but giving space for everyone and looking at that in terms of being able to show up in education from wherever you are and being able to bring your best self and being able to respect and trust the people around you that are either supporting or pushing back in your path and your educational experiences, and giving that voice and being able to hold that from everyone's perspective. So.
Thanks, Judith. Ron.
Yes, thank you. So in my current role as Vice President of Berkeley, and this is something you'll probably hear me refer to throughout the afternoon, there's a particular burden that I recognize here at the college, and that is in our mission statement, we say that Berkeley is founded on music of the African diaspora, right? So that acknowledgement places a specific burden on the college, one that we're still in process and trying to address. But for me, it comes down to two main points, and as someone mentioned, I'm sure we'll have time to dig more into this. And those points are our values. What are our values as an institution and how we live them out, and representation. Are we acknowledging the very people who created the music that we profess to teach and represent in our everyday life here at the institution? So that's a particular viewpoint that has become only stronger as I've moved up the ladder here at the college. What are our values? How do we live them? And who do we have in terms of representation? Who do we invite into our community? And how do we support those people?
Thanks, Ron. And I was formulating my first question to you, but you brought up mission statement. So I don't want to throw any of a curve ball in terms of adding a question I didn't ask, but I guess I would ask all of you, does the mission statement of your institution align with your thinking around anti-Blackness teaching or anti-racist teaching? So I'm going to go reverse. Ron, can you go first with that?
Well, the mission statement, well, there's a quote I like to use by James Baldwin, and that quote is, "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do." And so in terms of our mission statement is very clear. And I do think we have made tremendous strides here at the college. My history of the college goes back 44 years, which is when I was a 16-year-old student. So that's more than half of the life of the college. But we still have work to do. And I think it's being more and more recognized. And I am being called on to help lead a significant part of that effort. But we do have the mission statement. Now it's the doing part that needs to come to bear completely to really fulfill that mission statement.
Thanks, Ron. And then we'll just go to Judith.
Yes, Ron brings up a really good point. That I love the quote from Baldwin. That's exactly where I feel we are at MassArt. We have a really strong mission statement, and it's very clear our goals and what we're trying to do. But you know, if we look at the numbers, if we look at the representation, if we look at some of the actual things down in execution wise, we've got a ways to go. And yeah, we need to acknowledge that a lot of the things that are in our way is just our perception, and also just being able to interrogate like the systems that we have in place that allows the continuation of not being able to meet those goals. We know what we want to do. It's just how do we do those, and how do we get there? And we're getting smarter about that, but we still need to do some work towards that.
Thanks. And Brent?
Sure. Well, you know, at Emerson, we strive to educate leaders who are likely going to be some kind of creative force for good, right? And so we're expecting that they will be prepared for civic engagement, to foster and cultivate diversity in various manifestations and so forth. I would agree with our colleagues here and submit that I can't say I've seen any disagreeable mission statements in all of my years of doing this. That said, I think it really comes down to a mission statement can come to life. It's really how we animate these things and the commitment we make to certain manifestations of it. So germane to this conversation, it's not just about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, but it's how we bring these things particularly to life as it relates to anti-racist and anti-Black teaching and learning, right? Valuable experiences that prepare people for very particular kinds of issues, not necessarily new ones either, but it may be as some might call it a renewed commitment. Some might say it's a first serious try at a commitment that should have been made a very long time ago. And so, you know, I think, if I may for a moment, when I think about what Ron has shared with us, as someone who grew up in a musical family and is a musician himself, you know, I think about when I've heard people say that they love a certain genre of music, right? And you wonder, when you think about love, you think about one's relationship with things, right? So my background is in marketing. And so we often look at the consumer's relationship with the thing that they consume and say they love. And then so it behooves us to kind of make sure that students and the people who teach it, who should also be students, know about people like Georgia Tom Dorsey, right? And gospel blues, et cetera, to understand that there are parts of who we are as culture that often don't make their way into anyone's textbook. They don't make their way into discussions. And so people end up with an maybe underdeveloped love, that they're in relationships they don't quite understand. And it's possibly the case that some of the anti-racist progress we can be making, the anti-Black progress we can be making, is to help people get acquainted with the thing that they say they want to be in relationship with. So I'd like to say that people are coming from a well-meaning place, but they do need some help getting there, because even with good intentions, we can do some bad things without proper training, without proper guidance.
And truly bad things. So that's a great answer, Brent, because it kind of segues into my next question for you. And I know that at the first question I asked was from the context from your own personal being. But I also want to make sure that as we're addressing, that the audience knows that you're addressing questions, this is about anti-Blackness and anti-racism. So we're in the academy. So you are kind of talking a bit about faculty of color, particularly Black faculty, as they strive to do these things within the academy. And so in answering the next question I have is, in what ways does your life experience and background inform your approach in content and instruction? And if you've taught before or heard from your colleagues, Black faculty colleagues, can you give me some sense of the validity of that question or the answer to that question? So I'm going to go with Judith first.
So let me just make sure, like, you want to know where thinking about our experience, our personal experience, what we bring to teaching in this environment of being kind of open and inclusive. Yes.
Well, a little bit of that, but more so is when you're in the classroom, around your curriculum, around your syllabi, what you teach, what you include in your readings, or what designers that you use to show. How does your background influence whether you do that and how you do that in the classroom?
Okay, so I think from my background, I'm educated and worked in engineering. I was an engineer, mechanical design engineer, working in project management in engineering, and then I switched to industrial design. So the one thing that I mentioned before, my bifocal lens, is that I've been working in predominantly male oriented fields. So a lot of that comes from my background and what I bring into the syllabus and the teaching is being able to show up as you are and having a voice. So a lot of that is from all different aspects of looking at everyone and the perspective of who they are and how they come to the table of whatever they're learning experiences, and being able to share that and celebrate that. So that becomes a really good aspect of how we have discussions. I mean, very simple things like I'm teaching a footwear design class, and we one of the students were talking about they wanted to design a work boot. And so we're defining, like, what does that mean, a work boot? For this particular person, it means something very different from the individuals in the classroom because of the notion of what work boot is. Is it a steel-toed construction boot, or is it a Timberland stylish fashion type boot where had some functionality, but maybe it's more in style? So having these conversations and actually being able to talk about even our definitions of things that we know, like level setting on terms and understanding where we're coming from a perspective of our voice and our experiences, is a space where we have to stop and take time to think about things like this. So that's just one example of looking at what I bring into the curriculum and in my teaching practice.
Brent, do you care to continue?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm partially trained in culture, a little bit of anthropology, and I found that quite useful to help people kind of understand, in quotes, the origin of things and also the flow of things, of influences, right, that permeate society. So, I have made a point to spend some time around a very simple concept that has influenced much of Western style education. I think, therefore I am, right? Something very commonly alluded, right, from the physicist René Descartes, right? For many of us from high context cultures, right, coming out of West Africa and many other parts of the world where brown people live, we lean more towards I am because we are. So there are very different approaches to how we then think about collaboration and what should come of it, even why it should just exist. And I found that very useful, again, when we talk about bringing people together, what it means to be a team, what it means to be a group. This helps us get nearer to diverse perspectives on purpose, on function, and on understanding outcomes, which are not necessarily transactional ones, but they are just cohesive and communal ones. Aside from that, particular to disciplines, again, coming from a marketing communication angle or business angle, just really introducing students to some of the real innovators that I'm fairly certain they've never been introduced to. Right. So there are many versions of Garrett Morgan and the 3 signal traffic light that we see in business. Right. There are reasons that you see the retail experience that you do today because of a lot of Black and brown people. So I make sure I kind of educate students and colleagues to say, well, let's not take these things as just things that are there. They're not coincidental. There are very specific challenges that some people had. Right. Some of the innovations that we've had have come out of struggle. Benjamin Franklin would tell us necessity is the mother of invention. I make a point to help people realize that struggle and resilience are also parents of invention, So again, it provides a diverse lens to understand how we've gotten to use some of these innovations, how we've become introduced to them, and why they really do make sense. A lot of people have been introduced to problems of convenience in the 2010s and the 2020s. But it's very important that we make sure that a historical lens is applied in a very broad, diverse lens so people can understand, things like the food we eat, right? Things that were once upon a time food for slaves and indentured servants are delicacies that fetch high prices today. These are things that we need to be introduced to, and we need to speak about them early and often, right? So we think of ourselves as a community of storytellers. And as much as possible, if we can expand the story, both in terms of breadth and depth, very much important. And also to recognize, as Dr. Roberts noted in her introduction, teaching this truthfully means, right, that we have always had a tension inside of our identity. We've been very purposeful with inclusion and very purposeful with exclusion. But I'm one of those people who believes that makes something that makes this country as popular and as powerful as it is that tension also powers a lot of the resilience, where people insist on having a voice, they insist on having agency. So where we have seen opinions like impossible, when we add an apostrophe before the I, between the I and the M, we've learned that I'm possible is a reality for people like us having this conversation today, right? That didn't exist some time ago. So it's a very kind of holistic, never-ending conversation, right? Where effectively, I'm trying to create openings for people to get in where they see they might fit in. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it can't just be me talking, it can't just be us talking. It has to be a conversation that lives well beyond we're gone from this place, right? Again, I think that's part of why MLK told us he had a dream. Not the dream, but a dream. We got to get other people included in this.
Thank you, Brent. Ron.
Yes. First, I just want to refer back to something that Brent said when he was referenced the village concept, and that reminds me of the work of Bob Moses and the Algebra Project, and the idea that culturally, based on our Africanist background, that often Black and Brown people learn better in a group, in a collaborative setting, than as an individual. In terms of how my background influences my teaching, I think of a quote when I was a young musician on tour. I had an opportunity to perform with a renowned musician named Clark Terry, who was a longtime member of Duke Ellington's orchestra. And he said, when you become a teacher, tell the truth, Savage. When you become a teacher, tell the truth. And that wasn't news to me. It was actually a confirmation of something that I had learned already. And that is, you can't teach specifically Black music, which is my area of expertise. I know about classical music, but I would never say it's my area of expertise. You can't teach Black music separate from the culture and the experiences that created it, right? Which same way we're talking about how conflict creates resilience. Out of that resilience comes creativity. Out of that creative spirit, we have the Black performing arts, specifically, in this case, jazz music. So as a person who grew up in a very rural town in the South and learned music mostly by through the oral tradition, and then to come to college and realize that it was being taught through a Eurocentric lens, I understood right away that there was a conflict with the way things were being taught and actually how I had lived them as a professional musician since I was 13 years old. And so when I seek to teach, and this I think is a matter of that we're really trying to work through here at the college, I don't believe you can authentically teach Black music and perhaps any art form separate from the culture that influenced it and that it was born out of. I think it's a tremendous disservice because you can't teach hip hop accurately if you don't know about the work songs and the chain gangs. if you don't understand call and response, if you don't understand the sing-song nature of a village singing together that dates back to the African continent. So I would say that my background, learning music that way, and also learning music in a more academic setting, uh, I think they're both valuable and they both have a place. But I do feel that to eliminate and ignore the roots of the music and all of these forms of Black music, Black American music, I think is a disservice and actually underprepares the student to go out into the world and be seen as an authentic practitioner of that art form.
Thank you, Ron. And so let's stay in the classroom for just a moment to talk about specifically anti-racist teaching and anti-Black teaching. So to me, there are two schools of thought. There are courses that are specific to that topic. And I would question who gets to teach those, who's qualified to teach those. But on the other hand, can you have a lens in the classroom, anyone who teach, have an anti-racist lens in terms of the teaching? And then can everyone have an anti-Black lens in teaching as well? So I'm talking about all folks, not just Black folks. That's just a query for you to answer, like to think about that question, because it could be heated or not in terms of who you think or how you think that can come about, particularly that anti-Black piece as well. So I'd be interested for anyone to raise their hand and go first to start. Go ahead, Brett.
Okay, I'm just going to chime in a little bit because I'm just thrilled that Ron mentioned hip hop, and being a child of that generation, much as I love jazz, I really do, but just identifying very much with hip hop. I think about hip hop is something that was probably more diverse in its beginnings than people realize, right? So you've got the Kool Hercs of the world in Africa, Bambatas, and yes, it's mostly Black people. But when I think about your question, I think about the Searches and the Beastie Boys and other folks that have been around in hip hop who collaborated with a lot of people who looked like them and who didn't. People on the stage and people behind the stage. People who really did identify with this movement of bringing people together in ways they could not have otherwise gotten together. I think it has been such a force for that in that way. And I see a lot of parallel between anti-racism and the anti-Black topic we're discussing here in the classroom, because we've got a lot of people who I think have enough lived personal and professional experience that they have some assets to offer for classroom discussion. I think as we discuss talking or teaching honestly, teaching truthfully, there are going to be, I suppose, some of us who can say more, who can go deeper, who can go farther. That said, when I think about what we hopefully have learned from call out culture and cancel culture, we're not looking for perfection here. We're looking for honest, earnest effort to make progress. And so thus, it doesn't have to be a person of color who's involved in this work, right? I'd like to see people doing what they can. And we know collaboration works really well. It's a great opportunity to bring in colleagues, right? If that's a guest speaker, a co-teacher, something where maybe you say, I can maybe take you this far on this topic, but not as far as we need to go. That's why I've got this partner here to kind of help us along the journey and bring us to places that I can't bring you. That's actually okay. And where we can maybe get around to taking some of the burden off of people to achieve this perfection, we'll maybe realize some of the progress that has maybe eluded us because of our own, kind of hang-ups on what the person has to look like to do any of it. And so I think, yes, maybe it's maybe driven significantly by people of color, but not exclusively by any means. Some people just won't have that opportunity at every college and university, right? There are thousands of them in the United States alone. But I'd like some students who want some exposure to anti-racist, anti-Black education, where there are maybe no persons of color on the faculty. Right? I don't want the conversation to not happen because it's not someone who looks like me.
I hear what you're saying. And does
Mhm.
anyone want to chime in?
I wanted to just piggyback on what Brent is saying. I love the aspect of having community voices, being able to team up and actually have conversations. Some of the better experiences that we have in the classroom, it comes from a dialogue between two faculty members or a faculty member and a guest that's bringing in different perspectives of a particular topic. And that also allows you to be authentic around your truth and your experiences, and then having someone else being able to be in conversation with that, and then draw upon like what, having a conversation with the students around what do you know about this, and what is your relationship to it, because it gives that opportunity to not know and to be curious about it, to actually question what you're hearing and being able to dig deeper in terms of what this is and what the conversation is about and your relationship to the conversation. So I love that, bringing up, having the, if you don't necessarily have that experience, bring someone else in, have the conversation with them, being able to open up a dialogue.
Yes, if I could just jump in. So I want to start back at a point that Brent made and elaborate, and then I'll connect it to the classroom where we are. And that is that this idea of hip hop bringing people together across demographics is not a new occurrence in American history. We know if you go back to Bessie Smith or Ray Charles, Little Richard, name of that, these Black music was a place that always drew people from various racial groups and economic groups. The issue with that is when it goes from being a place of perhaps common mindset and collaboration to a place of cultural appropriation, where you ended up with the Elvises and the Vanilla Ices and the like, then it becomes a problem. So the same, I feel, goes for when we go into the classroom, when you look at teaching about anti-Black racism, racism in general. Authenticity is paramount. It's, when we say, this was a refrain some time ago at Berkeley, we couldn't find any qualified Black people to teach Black history. Right? I mean, it's statistically impossible, but that was a common refrain. We couldn't find a Black person to teach gospel music. We could, when we go into that and we delve into this appropriation and this denial of history and the culture, then it becomes a problem. I think it's important that we do learn from different people and do learn from different points of views and perspectives and life experiences. But I think we have to be vigilant about taking the easy way out of, well, we tried to make a difference. And so this is when I heard Judith saying, or maybe it was Brent, we're saying, it's important it's not just a Black people's problem. It's important for everyone to be involved. As a matter of fact, I would argue that racism is a white people's problem, right? Black people suffer the effects of it and the severe ramifications of it, but I would say there's no problem with Black people that causes racism. Right? So I would argue that it's actually a white people's problem, and that in order for it to be appropriately and ultimately resolved, it's going to take all hands on deck to clear things up and get these issues more in line.
Thanks, Ron. And I have.
May I chime in one more, if it's all right? I'm just moved by something that Rob said. Something I've learned in my role, kind of, engaging with folks who teach journalism and marketing communication and PR and speech language pathology, et cetera. There are times in I guess in society where you see where communities with an actual problem put their issue on the people they have the problem with. Right? That's kind of what I'm hearing a bit from Ron. And I think it's sometimes for the world, when you are in a position of majority or of power, sometimes the problem is yours to figure out, which I think offers, a useful lens and maybe a source for some metrics to say, okay, how much progress needs to be made and how do we make it? What is it that has moved me or us, right? Or our, whatever it is, to either create such systems, sustain them, or perpetuate them with whatever intention or not, with whatever intelligence or ignorance. What is it that we need to know? What is it that we need to come to understand to recognize that these things actually are systems? They are not happenstance creations, so we can dismantle some of these things, right? And forgive me, Ron, if I'm misinterpreting anything, but there are some things that we as Black and brown people cannot dismantle because they're not of our making, right? We have learned how to survive and thrive, and we've demonstrated the utmost of resilience, right? But when there are systems and structures in place, it's no different than asking someone to deconstruct something they didn't build. How do they do that? Right? If you didn't build the space shuttle, you didn't build a SpaceX rocket, and someone says, okay, take that apart. How really would you go about doing that? Whereas opposed to, if you have some idea, okay, look, I know something about how, jet propulsion systems and rockets are built. Maybe you're in a better position to recognize it because you've seen it on a day-to-day basis, and with careful, honest, authentic, truthful reflection, you might say, okay, now I see, with some of this training I have, how this thing probably came into being, how it was built. I see the purposes that it tends to achieve.
So I'm going to jump in right now. I have one more question for you, but I also want to let everyone know that now is the time for you to start put questions in the chat, because I'm sure some of you have some questions that you might want to pose to everyone or to one specific panelist. But I will, while we're waiting for those questions to pop up, I want to throw it out because, and it was kind of touched on, and the question is, based on everything we said, is it also almost a burden to educate folks on these subjects? So I'm going to be more specific is, do you think just because of who you are, you are relied upon to do the very thing as opposed to others who don't look like you? So if anyone wants to hop in and kind of speak to that as we're waiting for some questions in the chat. Go ahead, Judith.
So the one thing that I was, I started to bristle a little bit around understanding, deconstructing. Like, I feel like that is also not my burden to deconstruct as well. Like, if I'm trying to be authentic and show up in my best self, I feel like there's this burden that I need to understand the structure that I'm working in first in order to actually show up and actually be my best self. And that's a lot. That's a lot to take on. So sometimes you just want to just be. So when you say, like, as a human coming, being a Black woman, does this mean that I have to take on the responsibility to first understand the structure, deconstruct the structure, slip in there, and then try to build from there? That's a lot. So no, I don't want to do that sometimes. Sometimes I get it, that makes sense. But sometimes I just want to be able to show up as me authentically and be myself. It's hard. It's very difficult to understand how to balance those two things. So yes, we need to have that understanding that sometimes we may not get it right, but we need to have the space to be able to try and do and be there and do that and show up. So
Yeah,
Go
when
ahead.
this idea first, when I was first aware of conscious, like, wait a minute, I'm a leader, but I'm not necessarily a human. I'm a Black leader, right? And I complained to a mentor of mine, and he said, "Tag, you're it." And when you're the first of something, or one of the first of something, or one of the few of something, there's a burden, and we have to make a decision. Sometimes self-preservation, it has to be paramount. We have to make sure that we actually survive, right? And then other times we have to honor our ancestors and those who went before to create space where we can actually be where we are. And I think for me, I've just tried to take it as it comes. Sometimes I have to defer to my humanity, to my place as a husband, a father, a community member, and I have to work to preserve that. There are other times when I absolutely have to stand in the gap and be the one to say something that either people are unaware of or afraid to say or not sure how to say it. And so I think I've come to believe that for me, that's just part of the deal, right? That's part of the deal. I wish sometimes I could just be human. Like I'm just Ron Savage, the jazz drummer, the father, the husband, the grandfather, and those things. But that's unrealistic because there were others who made the decision to be more than that. And because of that, I have the opportunities. So therefore, there is some responsibility to the best of my ability to do that for those who are coming behind me or the students. I saw in the chat about the small number of students. We're the same at Berkeley. Black students make up about 4% of our population at a school founded on Black music. It can be very challenging and daunting for those students. So it's important that I'm aware and vigilant and do my part to stand in the gap to the best of my ability.
Thanks, Ron. And I'm going to say that we have a few questions in the chat, as you probably said. I'm going to call them out. But Brent, if you have a brief response, you can go ahead as well.
Yeah, sure. So I very much agree with Judith and Ron about the need to never on our own forget our humanity. And I think sometimes people don't realize how difficult that truly can be, as each of them has said. There are a lot of things kind of either thrown at you or that you just see, and sometimes if you don't say something, a lot of bad things can happen. And there are some days that doesn't happen, and there are some days a lot of that happens. And you have to, as Ronnie said, okay, so is this one of those times I need to stand in the gap? Is this one of those times I have to make sure something is said because it really could affect somebody in a way that I'm not comfortable with? Or you might be one of those few people who can address an issue in a timely manner. There might be a student who's kind of suffering from a discussion that's happening live in a classroom, and you really need to say something because you have to be there for them in a way that maybe they can't do that for themselves. So, but I agree with everything they have shared.
Thanks, Brent. So our first question from Ted is, white people make up a bigger percentage of the Emerson student body than all other ethnicities combined. How can we work to diversify our student body? And how can we support students of color who are already here? So I just want to chime in to answer a little bit of that question before you start to answer it. And I'm really integral in hiring faculty. You need to be intentional about doing that. That is the way it's done. You need to go out and say, this is what we're going to do, and not be afraid to use those words and say, I need more students of color. I need more Black faculty, and actually go out there and do that. I know that in the past, and I'm sorry to take up some time, but in the past, it's sort of like, hush, you can't really say that. And by not saying that, you're not actually being intentional. Therefore, our institutions look the way they do. And so my take on that is you need to be intentional. But I'll leave it up. Oh, so anyone want to take that on? Go right ahead. Raise your hand and go ahead and speak.
I think you just answered, actually. It's
Yeah.
all about being intentional and strategic. You have to be, there has to be a commitment. And then once you bring people, this was an issue that we face, once you bring people into the community, there has to be support for the people as they are. Not like, you're here now, everything needs to fit the way we've done it for the past 200 years, right? That's not really bringing people aboard, whether it's faculty or students. There has to be support for people, as Judith said, to be them their authentic selves, or else why bring them in the first place? Is it just for data and statistics, or is it really to enrich? Because there's no downside to having a diverse community. That's one of the things that often gets lost. It's not just a function of, well, we want to show that we went to recruit in some different areas, some different schools. No, actually, it makes communities better when you have a richer environment, when you have, at Berkeley, we used to brag, we have 99, well, maybe not 90, like 90 countries represented. But the few Black students who came here were having a horrible experience, and a school founded off their music. Curriculum, course of study, diaspora, the spreadsheet. They're actually, our students are representative of the curriculum. They're the living embodiment of our curriculum here at Berkeley, and they're having a horrible experience. What's that about? How is that possible, that the actual living aspects of the curriculum that we teach is suffering and can't thrive here at a college? So it's important to be strategic, but then you have to go beyond bringing people into your community and make sure the support and the equitable treatment is front and center as well.
Ron, go ahead. I just want to let everyone know we have about 10 minutes left and a few more questions. Go ahead, Ron. No, not Ron. Brent.
Oh, right. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, just to say briefly, fact of the matter is that when you're talking racial or ethnic minorities, we have to really remember what that means. And so as there are more and more institutions that seek to diversify their enrollment in faculty, there really are only so many of us, right? So there's a number in mind that kind of, I'm going to say, is difficult to achieve across the board, right? It's just not statistically possible. That said, what is possible for this student asking about majority students, you can ask, I think, fairly faculty to say, hey, I'd like to learn more about this. Where is there more? And believe it or not, we do have office hours, and we love when students come up to us and say, hey, give me some more things to read, right? What else is there? That's something that really, I think, is a power that students have that they could use to greater effect, right? And I think some of that curiosity can go viral, term of today, right? Can go viral in the learning experience, and kind of just let your instructors know, hey, we want more, we want something different. These books I'm reading, where are they from, right? Where do those people originate? These are not questions that we typically get. And then so the results show that. So the frustration, it's a co-created one. We can do something about that.
I have a question here. What are some examples of anti-racist initiatives that have been impactful on your institutions or at your institution? So can some of you speak to that? Go ahead, Ron.
I'll say quickly, because I actually have to go plug in my computer, but we started a program in 2017 called the Black Scholars Initiative that really serves as a wraparound program for our students. It starts with a pre-orientation program the week before school starts and includes mentoring throughout and program. We had a family dinner last night, as a matter of fact. But to give you some point of view for perspective for the impact, our retention rate of Black students has tripled, and our graduation rate of Black students has doubled since 2000. We're just getting at the timeline where you look at those, you know, the 5-6 year mark when you look at graduation rates, but we know that our graduation rates have tripled. I mean, double. Our retention rates have tripled. We used to have a retention rate of 30% for Black students. And our students who participate in the program have the highest cumulative GPA of any demographic at our college. So I would say that program has been intensely and significantly successful.
Does either Brent or Judith want to take?
Yeah, just one example comes to mind, and this will be really brief. So, you know, I know we've had several faculty and students. I think there's been a good student effort around speaking honestly and trying to find specific ways to decolonialize the curriculum at large, but certain courses, certain syllabi. And so again, a bit of interrogation of the course syllabus, right, of the topics. So this is an ongoing effort, but I think it's a good step in the right direction, right? Both for faculty who want to see this happen and for students who feel the same.
We're doing the exact same thing at MassArt, exactly what Brent just said. So we're trying to work on that through curriculum.
Thank you. I have a long one here. Bear with me. Racism is often thought of as an interpersonal form of conflict, oppression that leaves structural, institutional, and even epistemological forms of racism unattended or given far too little attention. From your intersectional vantage points, how do you navigate making concrete moves to protect yourselves from anti-Blackness if your colleagues or students can't yet grasp what complicity and allyship look like beyond their own personal interactions within the college/university? That was a mouthful, but you all got what I said, right?
I'm going to offer up maybe a blunt answer. Hopefully this does not disappoint the person asking the question. Frankly, there is no protection.
Yeah, my response was going to be just take a deep breath. Because yeah, I agree.
So no protection. And what is that about?
I'll take a try at this. You know, it comes from so many different places, seen and unseen, right? There are various manifestations of it on any given day. Some of this is created by people who are present. Some of it is inherited by them as a situational thing or a climatic thing. Sometimes they know how to deal with it. Sometimes they don't have the will to deal with it. It takes a bit of courage, I think, to deal with some things that don't directly affect you, but that affect someone else, especially when they're in smaller number, right? So it's not necessarily complicated. I think it comes down to very simple things of humanity, right? We have always seen human beings struggle when someone else is affected by something, especially when there are fewer of those someone else's, right? And then so, you know, let's be honest, it's rather inconvenient to deal with some of this race stuff as it affects any one of us on this panel, isn't it? You know, it takes a very particular kind of choice and commitment, understanding that there won't be any protection in kind of doing some of this work. There just won't be. So that can't be what is on our minds, I guess, as we do it.
So I will say, as I look at the clock and how we're those last comments and ending this panel discussion, they're sobering, but so true, and we live that from day to day. So so you can't sugarcoat it, and so your first blunt answer was probably the most appropriate. to answer that question as to what we deal with as educators. We have all the stuff that everyone as an educator does, and then there's another level of things that we need to consider when we do this. So I could go on for longer, but we can't. So I'm just going to say thank you so much for your questions, your time, and your attendance. And I just want to leave you with our next panel discussion, or our next event, which is on March 3rd from 12:30 to 2. ProArts will be hosting our second faculty development event of the semester. This event, titled Contextualizing the Impacts of COVID-19 Within Higher Education, will look at the impacts of COVID-19 on teaching the academy within the arts by engaging faculty members and admission representatives in the Boston Arts Academy Assistant Head of Schools in conversation. We will explore how students have been impacted along lines of race, the ways in which faculty members teach methodology has permanently shifted, and how the pandemic has impacted the way in which students approach the arts as a career path. So that proves to be another exciting conversation, but I would have to say this has been one. And as I started, we're in the midst of Black History Month, and it's a good time. It's overwhelming with our good history, and making note, Black history is history. But I also need to make note, for those who don't know, Black History Month was for us, the Black folks, to keep ourselves knowing about our history, since out there it wasn't being taught, and now it's become a bigger thing. But I just want to make sure that we understand that as we go out to our own separate ways and uplifting what folks like us have done yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Thank you so much.